The shuttle screamed through the atmosphere like a wounded bird, trailing smoke and fire across the darkening sky of Velroth 7, and inside the cabin, Dr. Elena Vasquez gripped her seat harness so tight her knuckles turned white. The pilot shouted something about engine failure, about the navigation systems going dark, about how they needed to brace for impact. But Elena could barely hear him over the roaring wind that tore through the hull breach on the starboard side. She turned her head and saw the Talani family 3 rows behind her, the mother wrapping her body around her young daughter, the father trying desperately to secure their safety harnesses as the ship bucked and twisted through the clouds. The Talani were a gentle species, their skin soft and luminescent, their bodies built for art and science rather than survival. And Elena had spent the past 2 weeks studying their culture as part of the diplomatic mission. Now she watched them struggle against forces their fragile forms were never meant to endure. The ground came up fast. Too fast, and Elena squeezed her eyes shut as the shuttle slammed into the forest floor with a sound like thunder and breaking bones. Everything went black when Elena opened her eyes again. She was hanging upside down in her harness, blood dripping from a cut on her forehead. And the cabin was filled with smoke and the smell of burning electronics. She fumbled with the release mechanism, fell hard onto what had been the ceiling, and crawled toward the nearest breach in the hull, coughing and gasping for fresh air outside. The forest of Velroth 7 stretched in every direction. Alien trees with bark like copper and leaves that glowed faintly blue in the fading light. She pulled herself out of the wreckage and stood on shaking legs, taking stock of her injuries. A few cuts and bruises, maybe a cracked rib, but nothing that would kill her the others. She needed to find the others. Elena circled the crashed shuttle, calling out, and one by one, the survivors emerged from the smoking ruins. First came Torvin, the Moravian trade envoy, his insectoid body covered in chitinous plates that had protected him from the worst of the impact, though one of his 4 arms hung limp at his side. Then the 2 crystalline diplomats, beings of living mineral whose bodies refracted light in rainbow patterns. They moved slowly, several of their outer facets cracked and dim. But they were alive. Elena kept searching, kept calling, and then she heard it. A small voice crying out in the alien tongue of the Talani. She ran toward the sound and found a little girl trapped beneath a section of collapsed bulkhead, her luminescent skin flickering with distress, her wide silver eyes filled with tears. Elena dropped to her knees and began pulling away the debris piece by piece until she could drag the child free. The girl could not have been more than 7 years old by human standards, small and delicate, with hair like spun moonlight and that soft glow that all Talani carried in their skin. "It is okay," Elena said softly, not knowing if the child could understand her words, but hoping the tone would translate. "You are safe now. I have you." The girl clung to Elena and sobbed, and Elena held her tight, stroking her hair, making soft sounds of comfort the way her own mother had done when she was young. But even as she comforted the child, Elena knew she needed to find the girl's parents. She carried the little one around the wreckage, searching every section of the destroyed shuttle. And when she finally found the Talani couple, her heart sank. They had not survived. The mother had died protecting her daughter, her body still curved in that same protective arc Elena had seen in the final moments before impact. And the father lay nearby, his neck broken from the force of the crash. Elena turned the child's face away, pressed the small head against her shoulder so those silver eyes would not see. "Do not look," she whispered. "Just hold on to me." The girl seemed to understand, or perhaps she simply sensed the terrible truth, because she buried her face in Elena's neck and wept. Night was falling fast on Velroth 7, and the temperature was dropping with it. Elena gathered the survivors near the least damaged section of the shuttle, where they could use the wreckage as shelter from the wind. The Moravian watched her with his compound eyes. his mandibles clicking in what might have been confusion or concern. "The child," he said in halting galactic standard. "She is not your species. Why do you carry her? Why do you comfort her when her own people are dead?" Elena looked down at the little girl who had cried herself to sleep in her arms. That soft glow dimmed to almost nothing, those delicate features peaceful despite the horror she had witnessed. "Because she needs someone," Elena said simply. "Because she is a child, and she is alone. And that is enough reason." The Moravian's mandibles clicked again, and he turned away, clearly unable to comprehend the logic of her words. The crystalline diplomats huddled together, their light flickering nervously, and Elena could hear them communicating in their harmonic language. Sounds like wind chimes in a storm. She did not need to understand their words to know they were afraid. Valra 7 was a frontier world, barely charted, far from any established trade routes or Dominion outposts. And their distress beacon might take days to reach anyone who could help. If it reached anyone at all, Elena looked out at the darkening forest, at those strange copper trees with their blue glowing leaves, and she listened to the sounds rising from the shadows, calls, hunting calls, the voices of predators waking for the night. Something lived in this forest, something that had heard the crash and was now moving toward them. Drawn by curiosity or hunger, or both, Elena tightened her arms around the sleeping child and felt her own fear rising like cold water in her chest. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist, not a soldier. Her expertise was in studying alien life forms, not fighting them, and she had no weapons, no armor, nothing but her wits and her will. But she looked down at that small face, those closed eyes, that gentle glow, and she made a decision. Whatever came out of that forest, whatever predators stalked toward them through the darkness, it would have to go through her first. The child stirred in her sleep, made a small sound of distress, and Elena rocked her gently. "I am here," she whispered. "I will not leave you. I promise." The hunting calls grew louder, closer, and Elena Vasquez sat in the wreckage of the Wanderer's Grace, holding someone else's child, waiting for the dawn. She did not know if the dawn would ever come. The dawn came slowly to Vorath 7, the alien sun rising blood-red through the copper trees, casting long shadows across the wreckage of the shuttle. Elena had not slept. She had spent the entire night watching the forest, listening to those hunting calls grow closer and then fade, then grow closer again, as if something out there was circling them, testing them, learning their weaknesses. The child, whose name Elena had learned was Kiri, had woken twice screaming from nightmares, and both times Elena had held her close and whispered soft words until she fell back into troubled sleep. Now Kiri sat beside Elena, eating a small portion of emergency rations from the shuttle's survival kit, her silver eyes still red from crying, her luminescent skin still dim with grief and fear. "The child should not eat our supplies," Torvin said, his compound eyes fixed on Kiri with something that might have been irritation. "She's not part of our mission. She is dead weight. She will slow us down and use resources we cannot spare." Elena felt something hot and sharp rise in her chest, something that surprised her with its intensity. "She is a child," Elena said, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made the Moravian's antennae twitch. "She will eat. She will be protected. And if you have a problem with that, you can take your share of the supplies and find your own way to safety." Torvin's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation, but he said nothing more and turned away to inspect his injured arm. The two crystalline diplomats, who called themselves Vex and Mora, approached Elena with careful steps, their bodies chiming softly as they moved. "We do not understand," Vex said, his voice like bells ringing underwater. "The Moravian speaks harshly, but his logic is sound. The child is not your offspring, not your responsibility. Why do you defend her so fiercely?" Elena looked at Kiri. who was watching the crystallines with a mixture of fear and wonder. And she reached out to smooth the girl's moonlight hair. "Where I come from," Elena said. "It does not matter whose child someone is. A child in danger is everyone's responsibility. That is simply how humans are." The crystallines exchanged a harmonic tone between themselves, and Mara tilted her head, light refracting through her facets. "We have heard stories of humans," Mara said. "Stories that seem impossible. Tales of your kind throwing yourselves into danger for strangers, dying for people you have never met. We thought these were exaggerations. Myths created to make your species seem more impressive." Elena smiled. A tired smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "No myths," she said. "Just the way we are built, I suppose. We cannot help it." Before the crystallines could respond, a sound tore through the morning air, a howl that seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the copper trees and vibrating in Elena's bones. Kiri grabbed Elena's arm and pressed close, her small body trembling, and then they emerged from the forest. Elena had studied predators across a dozen worlds. She had cataloged their teeth and claws and hunting patterns. She had written papers on the evolution of apex species in hostile environments, but she had never seen anything like the Vorothki. They were massive, standing nearly 8 feet tall on powerful hind legs, their bodies covered in ash-gray fur that seemed to absorb the red sunlight, their arms long and muscular, ending in hands with curved claws the length of combat knives. Their faces were elongated, almost wolf-like, but their mouths held row upon row of serrated teeth designed for tearing flesh. And their eyes, those terrible amber eyes, held an intelligence that made Elena's blood run cold. These were not mindless beasts. These were thinking hunters. And they had come for prey. 12 of them stepped out of the tree line and spread into a loose formation around the crash site, cutting off any hope of escape. The leader was easy to identify. The largest of the pack, his gray fur marked with pale scars from countless battles, his left ear torn and ragged, his amber eyes ancient and knowing he moved forward with a predator's grace, his nostrils flaring as he scented the air. And Elena watched those terrible eyes move from survivor to survivor. Assessing, calculating, choosing. Torvin backed away, his forearms raised in a gesture of submission, his compound eyes reflecting the approaching doom. "We should run," the Moravian hissed. "Scatter into the forest. Some of us might survive." The crystallines dimmed their inner light until they were barely visible, an instinctive response to danger, trying to make themselves small and unnoticeable. But Elena could not run because the pack leader's eyes had stopped moving, had fixed on one target with unmistakable hunger. He was looking at Kiri. Of course he was, Elena thought. Of course the predator would focus on the smallest, the weakest, the one who radiated fear like a beacon in the dark. The Talani were known throughout the galaxy as prey species. Their bodies soft, their defenses non-existent, their fear pheromones an irresistible attractant to any creature that hunted by scent, and Kiri was terrified. Her skin flickering with distress signals, her small body frozen in the grip of pure animal terror. The pack leader took another step forward, then another, his claws extending with a soft snicking sound, his lips pulling back to reveal those nightmare teeth. Kiri whimpered, a sound so small and helpless that it broke something inside Elena's chest, and in that moment, Elena Vasquez made a choice. She did not think about it, did not weigh the odds or calculate her chances of survival, did not consider that she was a scientist with no combat training facing a creature that could kill her with a single swipe of those terrible claws. She simply moved. She stepped between the pack leader and the child, placing her own body in the path of death, and she faced the predator with nothing but her flesh and her will. The pack leader stopped. His amber eyes widened slightly, and his head tilted to one side in what might have been confusion. This was not how prey behaved. Prey ran. Prey hid. Prey sacrificed the weak to save themselves, but this small creature, this soft pink thing with no claws or teeth or armor, had stepped forward instead of back. The pack exchanged glances, low growls passing between them, and Elena could feel their confusion like a physical presence in the air. They did not know what to make of her, and she intended to use that uncertainty for as long as it lasted. Elena stood her ground and forced herself to breathe. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to flee, to do anything but stand perfectly still before a creature that could end her life in an instant. But she had made her choice, and she would not unmake it now. The pack leader studied her with those ancient amber eyes, and Elena could see the wheels turning behind them, could see him trying to fit her into a category that made sense to his predator's mind. Prey did not do this. Prey did not stand between danger and their young. Not when the young was not even their own species. Not when running offered at least some small chance of survival. And yet, here she stood, this small, soft creature, placing herself in the path of death for a child that shared none of her blood. The pack leader growled, a low rumbling sound that Elena felt in her chest more than heard with her ears. And he took another step forward. Elena did not step back behind her. She could hear Kiri crying softly, could feel the child's small hands gripping the back of her flight suit. And she reached back with one hand to touch those trembling fingers. "It is all right," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that coiled in her stomach like a living thing. "Stay behind me, stay quiet. I will not let anything hurt you." The words were as much for herself as for the child. A way to remind herself why she was doing this, why she had chosen to face certain death rather than run. The pack leader heard her speak, and something flickered in those amber eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper. He stepped closer still, close enough now that Elena could smell him. A musk of fur and blood and something else. Something wild and ancient. That reminded her of stories her grandmother used to tell about wolves and forests and the old fears of humanity's childhood. Elena met his gaze and held it. She knew from her studies that direct eye contact was a challenge among most predator species, a declaration of dominance, a refusal to submit. She knew she was provoking him, pushing him, daring him to act. But she also knew that looking away would mock her as prey in his eyes. And once that happened, nothing would stop him from taking what he wanted. So she stared into those terrible amber depths and let him see her. Let him see that she was afraid. Yes, because she could not hide that. Her body betrayed her with its trembling hands and racing heart and the sweat that beaded on her forehead. But let him also see that she was not going to move. That her fear had not broken her will, that something in her was stronger than the instinct to survive. The pack shifted behind their leader, their growls rising in pitch, and Elena could feel their impatience, their hunger, their desire to end this strange standoff and claim their prey. One of the younger Varathki, smaller than the leader but still massive by human standards, began to circle to Elena's left, trying to flank her, trying to reach the child from another angle. Elena turned her head slightly to track him, but kept her body facing the leader, refusing to give ground. "No," she said, her voice sharp and clear. And the young Varathki froze. He had not understood the word, of course, but something in her tone had reached him. Something that cut through species and language and spoke directly to the hunter's brain. She was not asking. She was not pleading. She was commanding, and for one confused moment, the young Varathki obeyed. The pack leader made a sound, something between a bark and a snarl, and the younger hunter retreated. Returning to his place in the formation, Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, and she felt a bead of sweat roll down her spine. She had bought herself a few more seconds, but she knew it could not last. Sooner or later, the pack leader would make his decision, would decide that this strange, defiant creature was either a threat to be eliminated or prey too stubborn to know its place either way. Elena would die. She had accepted that now, had made peace with it in the cold, quiet space inside her mind where fear could not reach. She would die here on this alien world, far from Earth, far from everyone she had ever loved. And the only thing that would remain of her would be this moment, this choice, this stand. But maybe, just maybe, her death would buy Kiri enough time to run. Maybe the Moravian would finally find his courage and grab the child. Maybe the crystallines would carry her to safety while the pack was busy tearing Elena apart. It was not much of a hope, but it was all she had. The pack leader stepped closer. So close now that Elena could have reached out and touched him if she dared. As she saw his claws extend fully, saw those curved blades catch the red sunlight and gleam like polished steel, he leaned down, bringing his face to her level, and Elena felt his hot breath wash over her, rank with the smell of old meat. This is it, she thought. This is where I die. But she did not close her eyes, did not look away, did not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper but steady as stone. You will not touch this child. The pack leader's amber eyes bored into hers, and something passed between them in that moment. Something that transcended species and language and the ancient divide between predator and prey. He saw her, truly saw her, not as meat or obstacle or threat, but as a being with a will that matched his own, and Elena saw him too. Saw the intelligence behind those terrible eyes. Saw the weight of years and battles and decisions that had made him leader of his pack. They were both survivors, both fighters, both creatures who had faced death and refused to surrender. The difference was that Elena had nothing left to fight with but her refusal to back down. And in the face of that refusal, the pack leader hesitated. It was only a heartbeat, only a flicker of uncertainty in those ancient eyes. But Elena saw it and clung to it like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. She was still alive. She was still standing, and she would not stop standing until her heart stopped beating. The pack leader did not move. He stood there, his face inches from Elena's, his amber eyes locked with hers. And for a long, terrible moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Elena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel the blood rushing through her veins, could sense death waiting just beyond the thin barrier of her defiance. But something was happening behind those ancient eyes, something she could not quite understand. The pack leader was thinking, truly thinking, not with the simple instincts of a beast, but with the complex reasoning of a sentient being. And what he was thinking made him pause. He inhaled deeply, drawing her scent into his lungs. And Elena saw his nostrils flare as he processed the chemical information her body was sending. She knew what he would smell. Fear. Yes. A river of fear flowing through her blood and leaking from her pores in waves that any predator could read. But there was something else there too. Something that confused his hunter's senses beneath the fear. Woven through it like threads of steel through silk, was certainty, not confidence, not arrogance, not the false bravado of a creature trying to bluff its way out of danger. Just certainty, simple and pure and absolute. Elena was not pretending to be unafraid, was not hoping to fool him into thinking she was dangerous, was not playing any game he could recognize. She had simply accepted that she might die here, had weighed that possibility against the alternative of stepping aside, and had decided that her death was an acceptable price to pay. The pack leader had never encountered anything like it. In 10,000 hunts, in countless confrontations with prey species across a dozen worlds, he had never met a creature who smelled of both absolute fear and absolute resolve. Prey was afraid and ran, or prey was afraid and froze, or prey was afraid and fought with the desperate strength of the cornered. But no prey had ever been afraid and chosen to stand anyway. Not for themselves, but for another. Something stirred in the back of the pack leader's mind. Something old. Something passed down through generations of Vorathki hunters and stories, told around fires under alien stars. His people had myths, ancient tales from the time before they built ships and traveled between worlds. Stories of creatures they had encountered in the dark forests of their homeworld. They called them Velkari, the unmoving ones. The legends spoke of beings who stood between the hunters and their prey, who refused to retreat no matter the odds, who accepted death with open eyes rather than allow harm to come to those they protected. The Vorathki had honored the Velkari even as they killed them, because there was something sacred in such defiance, something that transcended the simple relationship between predator and prey. But that was thousands of years ago, before the Vorathki spread across the stars, before they became the feared hunters of the frontier worlds, before they forgot the old ways and the old honors. The pack leader had heard the stories as a cub, had dismissed them as fairy tales told to frighten young ones into obedience, had never believed that such creatures truly existed. And now one stood before him, smelling of fear and steel, refusing to move. She was small, dishuman, small and soft and breakable, with no claws to speak of and teeth that could barely tear meat by every measure the pack leader knew. She should have been the easiest prey he had ever taken, but she was not prey. He could see it now, could see it in the set of her jaw and the steadiness of her gaze, and the way her hand reached back to touch the trembling child behind her. She was a guardian. She was Velkari. The pack leader made a sound in the back of his throat, a sound his pack had never heard him make before, a sound that was part growl and part something else, something almost like reverence. The other Vorathki shifted uneasily, their hunger warring with their confusion, and several of them looked to their leader for guidance. What were they supposed to do with this strange creature who defied every rule they knew? The young hunter who had tried to flank Elena earlier stepped forward again, his impatience overriding his caution, and he snarled at the human with all the threat his young body could muster. But the pack leader turned and silenced him with a single look, a look that carried the weight of absolute authority. The young one retreated immediately, his tail tucking between his legs, and the rest of the pack went still. The pack leader turned back to Elena. She had not moved during the exchange, had not taken advantage of the distraction to run or hide or do anything but stand exactly where she had been standing. She was still watching him, still meeting his eyes, still refusing to acknowledge that she was supposed to be afraid. And in that moment, the pack leader made his decision. He had hunted across worlds, had taken prey of every shape and size, had earned his scars and his rank and the fear of every creature that crossed his path. But he would not hunt this one, not because she was too dangerous, though in a way she was more dangerous than any prey he had ever faced, not because he was afraid, though something very close to fear moved in his ancient heart. He would not hunt her because she was Velkari. And some things were sacred, even to predators. The old stories said that killing a Velkari brought doom upon the hunter, that their spirits would haunt the pack for generations, that their sacrifice created a debt that could never be repaid. The pack leader did not know if he believed in spirits or debts or any of the mystical trappings of the old tales, but he believed in what he saw. And what he saw was a being worthy of honor. He would not kill her. He would not take the child she protected, and he would make sure his pack understood that this human, this small, defiant creature, was not to be touched. The pack leader held Elena's gaze for one final moment, and then he did something that made every other survivor gasp. He lowered his claws, slowly, deliberately, with a grace that spoke of ritual and meaning. The ancient hunter retracted those terrible curved blades until his hands were almost human in their appearance, and then he bowed his head. It was not submission. Elena could see that clearly. There was nothing defeated or broken in the gesture. It was acknowledgement, recognition, a warrior's salute to another warrior, The other Varathki watched in stunned silence as their leader, the most feared hunter on Varath 7, the beast who had never shown mercy to any prey, paid tribute to a small human woman with no weapons and no armor and no hope of victory. One by one, the rest of the pack lowered their claws. They did not understand what their leader had seen, could not comprehend the ancient recognition that had passed between predator and guardian. But they trusted him as they had always trusted him. If he said this creature was not to be hunted, then she was not to be hunted. The pack leader made a sound, a low harmonic call that echoed through the copper forest, and the Varathki responded instantly. They turned away from the crash site, from the survivors, from the child who still trembled behind Elena's legs, and they moved as one toward the tree line. The pack leader was the last to go. He lingered for a moment, his amber eyes still fixed on Elena, and she thought she saw something in those ancient depths that looked almost like respect. Then he turned and vanished into the forest, his gray fur blending with the shadows until he was gone within seconds. The clearing was empty. The only sound was the wind moving through the copper trees, and the soft chiming of the crystalline diplomats and Elena's own ragged breathing. She stood there for a long time, afraid to move, afraid that any motion would break whatever spell had fallen over this place and bring the hunters rushing back. But the forest remained silent, and slowly, carefully, Elena allowed herself to believe that she was still alive. Kiri burst into tears. The child threw herself against Elena's legs and sobbed, her small body shaking with the force of her relief and her grief and all the terror she had been holding inside. Elena dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around the girl, pulling her close, holding her tight, and for a moment she let herself cry too. She had been so certain she was going to die. She had made peace with it, had accepted it, had prepared herself to feel those claws tear through her flesh, and now she was alive. And Kiri was alive, and somehow, impossibly, they were both going to survive. Torvin the Moravian approached on unsteady legs, his compound eyes wide with something that might have been shock or disbelief or both. He said, his mandibles clicking with each word, "What did you do, human? How did you make them leave? What power do you have over such creatures?" Elena looked up at him, tears still streaming down her face, and she laughed, a broken sound that held more exhaustion than humor. "I did not do anything," she said. "I just stood there. I just refused to move." "But that is impossible," Torvin insisted. "The Varathki are killers. They hunt everything. They show mercy to nothing. In all the records of all the worlds they have visited, there is not one account of them sparing prey." Elena shook her head and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Maybe they saw something they recognized," she said quietly. "Maybe they saw someone who would rather die than abandon a child. And maybe that meant something to them." The Moravian stared at her for a long moment, his antennae twitching, and then he turned away without another word. Elena did not think he understood, did not think any of them understood, but it did not matter. What mattered was that Kiri was safe. The crystalline diplomats approached next, their bodies chiming with harmonics that Elena had learned to recognize as wonder and awe. "We will tell our colonies of this day," Vex said, his voice like crystal bells. "We will sing of the human who stood between the hunters and the child. We will make sure the galaxy knows what your kind is capable of." Elena shook her head again, embarrassed by the praise. "It was not special," she said. "Any human would have done the same." "No," Mora said softly. "That is exactly what makes it special. You think this is normal. You think standing before death to protect a stranger's child is simply what one does. And that, human, is why your species is unlike any other in the known universe." 3 days later, a rescue ship found them. The distress beacon had reached the Dominion patrol, and they had come as quickly as they could. Uncertain of what they would find in the wreckage, they found 4 survivors and 1 small Telani child who refused to let go of a human woman's hand. The Talani authorities arrived shortly after. Officials in gleaming robes who had come to claim the orphaned daughter of their dead diplomats. But when they reached for Kiri, the child screamed and wrapped herself around Elena's leg and refused to move. "No," Kiri said. The first word of galactic standard she had spoken since the crash. "No, she is mine. I stay with her." The officials exchanged confused glances. Unsure how to handle a child who was choosing an alien over her own kind, Elena knelt down and looked into Kiri's silver eyes. Those beautiful luminescent eyes that had seen so much tragedy in such a short time. "Kiri," she said gently, "these people are here to take you home, to find you a family. You should go with them." Kiri shook her head fiercely. "You are my family," she said. "You stood between the monsters and me. You were ready to die for me. That makes you my mother now. That is how it works. You cannot leave me." Elena felt her heart crack and mend and crack again, all in the space of a single breath. She looked up at the Talani officials, at their uncertain faces and their gleaming robes. And she made another choice. "I would like to apply for guardianship," she said. "If your laws allow it, I would like to raise this child as my own." The officials looked at each other, and then at the small girl who clung to the human with absolute trust. And something in their faces softened. "It is irregular," one of them said slowly, "but not impossible. We will begin the process. If the child wishes to stay with you, we will not force her to leave." Kiri's face broke into a smile so bright that her luminescent skin blazed with light. For the first time since the crash, she threw her arms around Elena's neck and held on as if she would never let go. Elena hugged her back and whispered into her moonlight hair, "I guess I am a mother now." Years later, when the Varothki finally made contact with the Galactic Dominion, they asked to speak with the human species first. They came not as conquerors or raiders, but as ambassadors, carrying with them an ancient story that had spread through their packs like wildfire. The story of the Valkyrie, the unmoving ones, the guardians who stood between predators and prey. The story of a small, human woman who had faced death with open eyes and refused to step aside. They asked the humans one question: "Is it true that all of your kind would do what she did? Is it true that any human would die to protect the child not their own?" And the humans, confused by the question, answered simply, "Of course. That is just what we do." The Varothki nodded, as if this confirmed something they had long suspected, and from that day forward, they added a new chapter to their ancient myths. The humans, they said, are Valkyrie. All of them do not hunt what they protect, and across the galaxy, in every corner of known space, the story spread and grew and became legend. The story of Dr. Elena Vasquez, who stepped between the predators and the child, and the pack who lowered their claws in silence.